what's going on. So, it's kind of funny. I just filmed the entire right side of the car, but my captain showed up and we were talking about some stuff I don't want all over the internet. And I forgot to turn the camera off and stop what I was doing. So now I get to start over on this side. So, welcome to one of my videos. Today I have a 2015 Dodge Dart. I'm doing front and rear pads and rotors. The rears are not too low. I haven't checked the fronts yet. Customer was told they needed to be done. Didn't want to take any chances. I told them the rears may or may not need to be done. The fronts may or may not need to be done. He said that he'd prefer just to do them all because he's never done them and he doesn't know if they've ever been done. So that's what we're doing today. So when you're doing the rear pads and rotors on a Dart like this, start off, just take off these caliper bolts. They're 14 millimeters. Go ahead and get this caliper out of the way, give it a little wiggle and it should pop off. Try to hold that up out of the way there. This car has these little springs that just push into the pads. Those just pull right out. And you can pull the pads out. As you can see, these were about half-life. Still had plenty of pad left to them, but rotors were very rusty, which is causing a lot of uneven wear patterns. So that was probably some noise that he originally had looked at when he was getting his oil change done. Take off the hardware for the caliper bracket. Next, you're going to take off the two bolts that hold the caliper bracket into place. These are T50s, I believe. Correct, T50s. Go ahead and loosen this one up. Take the caliper bracket off, and you just have the rotor left with this one Allen head screw. I did have the other side strip. It's pretty common here in New England. These rotor screws typically don't last too long. Kind of expecting the same thing to happen over here. Hopefully it doesn't, but we shall see. Make sure your Allen fits in there good and snug. And this one came out nicely, so I did replace the other side for him. I have a buddy that works for Dodge, and he has a surplus of these that he's just taken off over the years. Probably going to need a hammer to get this rotor off. So go ahead and do that. You'll have to excuse the ridiculous hammer. I just actually loaned out my good hammer like 5 minutes ago. but just give it a few soft taps to start. Especially on these, they don't get stuck on there too bad usually. So I don't like to start beating right on the rotor face itself. Not that this one's going to be reused, but you wouldn't want to do that if you were reusing it anyway. But just because it puts a lot of stress on the wheel bearing, so I like to hit right around this edge. And as you can see, pops right off. That does a lot less stress to the wheel bearing, so it'll save you time, save the customer time and money. If your hub here is really rusty, go ahead and wire wheel that. This one's actually not that bad. It just has a little surface rust that's stuck, so I'm gonna leave this one be. Go ahead and get your new rotor. Throw that on there. Go ahead and get this screw put in. That'll help by holding the rotor in place so that it's not bouncing all around on you. For every bolt, make sure to start it by hand, guys. You don't want to cross-thread something on, especially on a brake system. One, it compromises the structural integrity of the design. Also just makes it harder for you and the customer and everyone, really. These bolts don't have to be in there tight. They're just there to hold the rotor into place. Next, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and pull these pins out, re-grease them. They've still got plenty of grease, as you can hopefully see from the factory, but always re-grease them. That way you know they'll never get jammed up. And then they should just slide back on this boot if you just push the whole pin down and then use your fingers to work it on there. It usually just pops right on. There you go. I'm gonna go ahead and get this put back into place. Some people use Loctite on these. I don't necessarily find it to be a necessity. I'm not opposed to using Loctite on any brake system bolts, but especially up here in New England, if I were to just leave these on the car, install them and tighten them up properly, and leave them on the car within a week or two, especially in the winter time like it is right now, the road salt and everything, rust is gonna help hold those in place. Not really a whole lot we can do for that, so I don't want to make it any harder to come off next time, especially on things like Torx bits that like to strip out. Got those on there nice and snug. Next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and put the new hardware on this caliper bracket. Make sure it seats all the way, or else you'll never get the pad in there nicely. Next thing we're going to do is go ahead and put the new pads on. When you're doing this, make sure you grease these ears. That'll help make sure that it slides, prevent it from sticking and rusting into place. Also, grease back here on this backing plate. It's not necessary for most companies as an OEM recommendation, But what that'll do is it'll help dampen any noise. And it'll help prevent the caliper piston from actually sticking on the pad and causing uneven wear issues. Push that into place. Do the same thing for the other pad. Don't need a lot. Next thing we're going to do is go ahead and put the new springs on these pads. I just push them slightly on one side if they'll stay. In this case, they won't. What you're going to want to do next is take your caliper tool. Sorry about that delay, guys. I've got it on the other side of the car. And you're just going to go ahead and push this caliper back in. It does need to be twisted, so if you don't have one of these, you're not really going to be able to do this job properly. And that's what I'm all about, is just getting everything done the right way. Causes less problems in the long run. Alright, that's not going to stay. So, on this one, it works well for me if I just twist this by hand and use a wrench just on the screw portion. If you have to use much more force than this, there's a chance that that piston's actually seized, and you don't want to break the tool, you don't want to break the caliper, break a line, any of that. So make sure just to go easy. Doesn't take a whole lot of force for these. As you can see, the piston's now pushed all the way in. So here's where the fun part is on these. I'm not a big fan of these springs because it can be pretty problematic to try to get everything lined up and installed just right. These springs work by pushing the pads apart, and that prevents excessive drag, so you don't hear brake noise while driving down the road, and your pads wear nice, even, and don't wear excessively quick. Make sure the pads are properly in the caliper bracket, and while squeezing the pads together, just work this caliper over like that, and it should be sitting nicely. Shouldn't have to force anything. Start these bolts again by hand. Like that. And go ahead and take your, I'm using a ratcheting wrench, but your socket will do, your wrench, whatever you want to use. And just hold this pin here. Shouldn't have excessive force for that. The thread should be nice and clean. Snug these up. Oop, careful not to do that. If there's any damage, I pay to fix anything like that, so be cautious of that. You don't want to lose money on a brake job. You want to make some money. All right. Once you got those snugged up, all you have to do is throw your wheel back on and you're good to go. Let's move on to the front. All right, guys. So for the front pads and rotors, pretty similar to the rear. Just typically these aren't screw-in calipers. Oh, that's no good. So I'm gonna guess that these have been done in the past. I'm gonna see if I can get you in there to see this. The slide pin is actually not on all the way. So that should be sitting flush against this ear of the caliper. But there's a gap because someone didn't line it up right. So it's not sitting properly. Hopefully that bolt's not damaged or anything of that nature. But we will find out. I'm gonna go ahead and start off taking these two bolts off like rears. That's actually a perfect example of why I'm doing this channel, so that someone doesn't do something themselves and miss a step or do something improperly. This pin should have been sitting right up against the ear like that, locked in by this little tab there, but instead it was sitting on the tab like that. So again, hopefully nothing's broken. I don't foresee anything being broken. The bolt looks okay. When you're doing the front, guys, be smart about it. Realize, you know, the car is, this one is front wheel drive. So if you jacked it up and have the front end air like I have both sides right now, make sure to put the parking brake on. Make sure the parking brake works. You don't want to have this car go sliding, fall off the jack stand. You'll cause a lot of damage that way. As you can see, these pads were about due to be changed. They're a little sloped. It's about 2 millimeters over here, about 3 to 4 millimeters over here. That's because whoever changed these pads before, they didn't grease the ears, like I said on the rears. That's the kind of thing that can happen from not doing that. So always make sure to just take the time to do things right the first time. Pull this hardware off. So these are external Torx bits. I don't have that set on me. 12 points work just the same. So just, if you think you might strip it with a 12 point, go get the external torque bit. I'm gonna give it a shot and see how tight those are. So if you are using 12 point, it's going to be a 16 millimeter. So these were way over tightened. should not be that hard to take these off. It's a lot of cars up here in New England. If you have bolts that don't come out like that, it's usually rust. These are pretty clean. It's only a very little bit of surface rust. So that was just someone that put a little too much Loctite and really over tightened the hell out of it. So luckily that won't be happening again. So this bolt, this Allen head, it holds the rotor into place. This one doesn't want to come out either. A little trick, if it doesn't want to come out easily at first, just take your hammer and just smack where the bolt is. That should shock it, help loosen up any rust, hopefully. Really hoping this one doesn't start to strip out. Not holding high hopes though. Again, up here in New England, it's pretty common for these to strip out. There it goes. All right. Back to the chisel and punch. Alright guys, so now that I got that off, you can see just from the impact of chiseling out that retainer screw, the rotor just popped right off. Next, make sure that your hub is clean again. Then we're going to start putting the new parts back on. So one thing I recommend to all my customers is just buy the good stuff. A lot of people say things as small as rotors, you can just buy a store brand, which is true most of the time, but then you may get a braking pulsation. May not fit just right. In this case, the customer went with the Bosch Quiet Cast. Not sponsored. Feel free to sponsor me though. Just kidding. This bolt's not in too bad a shape, so. Just gonna use it to hold the rotor in place again. I do all the work on the guy's cars, so I'll be chiseling that out next time anyway. So next, I'm gonna take our, just like in the rear, I'm gonna go ahead and grease these caliper pins and put new hardware on it. I'll get back to you. All right, let's go ahead, get these caliper bolts threaded in. Go ahead and tighten those up. Again, guys, it doesn't need to be super tight. Next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and grease up these pads. Now, one interesting thing about these pads is they have the wear indicator. So with this wear indicator can only fit in one direction. Note how the inner pad had it on this corner, but it could fit on either side. These pads are universal and you're supposed to put the wear indicator on yourself. So I'm going to do that now. The front pad, the brake kit came with 4 wear indicators. You could put them on both pads. OEM did not come with 4. Well, I don't know if it's OEM or if it's just wherever, but either way, the car, when I first saw it, only had 2 on it, 1 on the inner pad on both sides. So I'm going to go ahead and just put the 1 on for now. That just pushes right on. Make sure you get it on nice and straight in the groove. Make sure it's sitting properly. And it's all the way on there. And go ahead and install the brake pads. There it is. Ow. Make sure if that happens, you didn't pick up any chunks of rust. Pad in there again. Get this other one greased up. Get that installed as well. This is a messy part of the job. Do your best not to get any grease on the face of the rotor or on the pad material itself. That can cause a reduction of the friction, which is what stops the vehicle. And obviously, you're not changing brakes to lose stopping power, you're doing it to gain stopping power. So do your best not to get grease anywhere that touches a stopping surface. Once you've got these pads in there, everything's greased, ready to go. You're gonna need to push this piston back in. The tool that I use for the rear, I like this setup because it actually allows me to do all different brakes, whether or not they're twisting, all with the one tool. So I'm just installing this flat disc just to push on the caliper piston. Go ahead and get this on there properly. Even though it's not twisting, just like the back, be sure to go slow. Again, you don't want to damage the caliper. You don't want to blow a line or a hose. You don't want to damage the master cylinder or overflow it with brake fluid. So just take your time, go nice and gently. It should ease right back in there. If you have to force it, there's a good chance there's a damaged hose, a damaged line, damaged caliper. So luckily this one's moving nice and smoothly. And once it stops, it's good to go. This side, because it's not twisty, twist in, you can go ahead and back this out. And just thread this part in. I will throw a link to this tool in the description. In case you want to look it up yourself. It's the Lyle Universal Brake Disc Caliper Tool, part number 25,000, I apologize. So you can just type that into Google. Make sure before you put this back that you correct the seal, because sometimes this will happen. Just use your fingers and work the seal back into its place. Should sit almost like an accordion in between the piston and the caliper itself. I can feel this one's getting dry rotted and whatnot from the winters already, so I really don't want to take chances on damaging this one. This is what prevents all the road debris from getting into your caliper and seizing that up. So make sure it's in there properly. Once you got that all nicely done, go ahead and slide the caliper over the pads. Start your bolts by hand. Now, if you paid attention when I took the caliper bolts off initially, this pin was not sitting properly. Make sure these pins sit correctly in their spot so that you don't have any issues with broken bolt, bent pin, and then you have to go and replace those parts as well. I like to just thread the bolts by hand until the pin's pulled up against its locking tab. And that way I know when I tighten these down, they're not gonna twist the pin into a spot where they shouldn't be. This wrench is a little long for the bumper. Alright guys, so after you finish snugging up those caliper bolts, you'll just want to throw the wheel back on, make sure everything's good to go. Make sure to test drive the car. If there's a break-in sequence for the pads and or rotors, make sure to do that. Sorry I'm doing this in a different spot and a little later. My camera actually died on me, so I had to charge it up and finish up the video. But hope you guys like this material. If you didn't, if there's something I can improve on, put it in the comments. Like and share it, and thanks for your time.